So we'll be starting shortly. I'm just going to give people another minute to join us, and then we will get going with the webinar this morning. Sometimes when people are using Zoom for the first time, it takes them a minute to log on and log off. So I'm just going to give people a couple of minutes to do that, and then people can join us. Great to see so many people on the call today. Thank you for joining me. So we will be starting in a couple of minutes. So thank you very much for joining me. We'll just wait one more minute and then we'll get started this morning on the call. So I've muted everybody, but you can unmute if you have a question throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and identify yourself and ask a question. And at the end, we'll have a time at the end to ask questions as well. So welcome everybody this morning to the webinar. I called it Open Mouth, Remove Foot. Because I'm not sure if you know that if you've ever had those situations where you've been talking to somebody and you've said ABC and they hear X, Y, Z, and you wonder what the heck's going on. And there's that missed communication. So that's why I call this Open Mouth, Remove Foot. So sometimes you just want to take that foot out of your mouth because you've just said the wrong thing. So welcome everybody this morning. I think pretty well most of the people that had registered are logged in. There may be a couple of extras, but I think we will get started because we're here. So thank you for joining me this morning. I'm just going to make sure that I have this set up right. Yes, I do. Okay. So there are some of you on the call that are familiar with social styles, and for you, this will sort of be a bit of a reminder. For other people on the call, this may be a new process for you. And there's a couple of reasons why I love this model of interpersonal communication skills. It's because it's so simple. Now, if any of you on the call have done any other kind of communications or behavior assessments like Myers-Briggs or DISC or colors or anything like that, you may actually recognize some of the same things that this has. But this one is really, really simple and easy to use. In fact, I often call it DISC for Dummies, just because it's very, very simple. And I see more and more people are joining us on the call, so we'll get going. So welcome this morning to my workshop on social styles, introduction to social styles, or as I called it, Open Mouth, Remove Foot. And as I was just saying, sometimes we have that miscommunications, don't we? We're saying something to somebody, they just don't get it, they miss it. You've asked somebody to do something if you're in a management role and you go back and it hasn't been done for whatever reason. In fact, Stanford University did a study that showed that 90% of all communications misses its mark. 90% of all communications just goes by one another. And so one of the things that this hopefully today, this model, what it will do is give you a tool that you'll be able to use to help you improve how you communicate, how you understand other people. Now, I know there's some folk on this call that use the phone in their work. This is very appropriate for that as well, because it will talk about how you can recognize how people are saying things, what the intonation they're using on the phone, what that can tell you about the person on the phone, whether it's a client or a customer or just a friend. This, I think, cartoon says it all for me. This says it all. In the top panel, you can read that. Okay, Ginger, I've had it. You stay out of the garbage. Understand, Ginger? Stay out of the garbage or else. And in the bottom, what they hear. The top is what we say. The bottom is what they hear. How many times in our communications has that happened to us? Lots, right? So as I said, what I want to do in the next hour is give you a model, and I'll guarantee that throughout, at the end of this hour, you're going to be using this thing. You're going to be taking it away and using it. In fact, throughout this hour, I'm sure I'm going to take you through a process to help you use this model. So let's get started. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to grab a piece of paper, a pad, and on that pad, I'd like you to write A, B, C, D. And I'm going to throw some questions on the slides, on the screen. And what I want you to do is I want you to just put a check mark beside which one you think represents you. Now, there's a couple of tricks to this. One of the tricks is don't take too long. Don't take too long thinking about it. In fact, I'm only going to give you 20 seconds to think of it. If I go by too fast, don't fret, don't worry. I've got another question I'll ask you later on that will help you out. But for now, just whatever comes to your mind. So, for example, this is the first question. What is your preferred way of dressing? If you think your answer is A, designer, classy, more formal, put a check mark beside the A. If you think it's bold colors, trendy, informal, lots of black, put a check mark against the B. If it's gentle, muted colors, casual, loose sweaters, tracksuits, C. And if it's D, put a check mark beside the D. All right. So again, I'm not going to give you much time to think of that. Just which one do you think it is? Okay. Here's the next question. And by the way, let me just say, while you're looking at this question, and put a check mark behind which would you think it is for you. In meetings, are you more direct and to the point, animated, excitable, dreamy thoughts, specific, concise, whichever one it is for you. And let me just say that there's no right or wrong answer here. It's whatever you think is what you are most of the time. You know, there are times that you are more direct. There are times you probably concise. There are times that you maybe excitable, but what are you the most? What are you most often? What is your preference? Here's the next question for you. Which shape resonates with you? A, B, C, or D? And put a check mark beside whichever one it is for you. Okay. All right. When making critical decisions, do you require options for various course of actions, testimonials from trusted others, assurances of support, evidence and proof? And again, there are times you maybe need different ones of these, depending on the situation. But more often than not, which is the one that resonates with you most? Okay. Try this one. If given a free choice, where would you most prefer to live? Do you like a big house in the suburbs? Would you prefer a country home on acreage with friendly neighbors? And let me just say, price is no option here, okay? This is your dream. If you had free choice, price is no option, what would it be? Would it be C, cabin in the woods? Or would it be D, condo or townhouse in a downtown area? Eat out. Like if you're in Vancouver, it'd be like the West End. Okay. What about this one? Your most favorite vacation would be adventure and travel. That would be like a safari or a Caribbean all-inclusive resort, or at home at a cottage, reading, resting, or would you prefer an organized city tour or country tour? You know, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium, that kind of thing. So which one would be your preference? Okay. I'm giving you kind of 30 seconds to think about some of these things. When attending a seminar, do you prefer practical information that is brief and summarized, few workshops? Do you prefer lots of fun learning jokes, analogies? Would you prefer a comfortable, low pressure environment, no role playing, nice people? Or would you like when you attend a seminar, do you prefer logically laid out, no ambiguous information, follow the agenda? Which one? That might take a little bit more time to think about. Think about that. Which one do you think it would be for you? And again, it's your preference, right? Sometimes you like all of those things, but more often than not, there's one thing you prefer. All right. Which of the following motivates you more than the others? Getting and seeing results, recognition and applause, personal attention and friendship, or lots of organized activity going on? What motive would you say motivates you more? Is it getting those results, you know, driving towards them and finally getting it? Is it the recognition and from your peers, from your bosses? Is it the personal attention and friendship, like being part of something big? Or is it making, you know, what motivates you is it's organization, the stuff happening. All right. Now, this, I like to say, this is not what your office may be, what you'd like your office or workspace to be, but what it actually is. So for those of you who don't have, quote unquote, an office, your workspace. So is your office, is it actually neat and organized with fun stuff, friendly with personal pictures and mementos, or is it just like a basic working environment, laid out, practical, charts, those types of things? So again, not what you'd like it to be, what it actually is. Your preferred way to sleep. Now, this may seem like a strange question, but it's in here for a reason. Do you prefer to sleep on your back straight out, in a cuddle, almost fetal position, on your side with your knees slightly bent, or on your stomach with your arms up by your head? So, what do you think it should be? All right. That one should be pretty straightforward. So let's go to the next one. So would you say that you are more high assertive and reserved, high assertive and outgoing, less assertive and outgoing, or less assertive and reserved? What would you say you are? Okay, now once you've done that, just add up the columns. Add up your columns. Your rows rather, add up your rows and see which one you've got that's the most number. And when you look at that, now you may have some where, you know, you're equal or you're the same. Like you may have 3, 3, 2, 1 or whatever. And that's okay, that's all right, that's okay. So, but I'm going to show you one more slide. What I'd like you to do is take a look at your highest ones. And if you had more check marks in the A, does this describe you? If you had more check marks in B, does that describe you? And if you have more check marks in C, does that describe you? And if you have more check marks in D, does that describe you? Just take a look at that. And if you're not sure, and if there's still some ambiguity, don't worry about it. I have a question that I want to ask you later on that I think will be very helpful in nailing it for you. Okay, but take a look and see where you think that which one, if that matches your numbers. Okay. Now remember, put that piece of paper aside because we're going to come back to what you scored on. So if you tied on one, don't worry about it. We'll deal with that. And again, if anybody's got questions throughout this session, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. We can answer it as we go along. And at the end of the session, we will have time for questions as well. So what that was my version of the sorting hat. And what it's done is it's placed you into one of 4 areas. And we're going to talk about those 4 areas in a second. But before we do that, let me just give you some definitions. Let me say right up front, what I am not in this, what we're going to be talking about today, we are not talking about personalities. This has got nothing to do with personalities. This model is strictly about behavior, what we see and what we do. So like the example of a pie is, we're looking at the crust of the pie, not the inside of the pie, right? We're just looking at the crust, what we can observe. We're not talking about personality. And this is one of the reasons why I love this model, is because it doesn't get into the psychological weeds. It just says, this is the way we are, this is the way other people are, live with it, work with that. We don't have to get into, well, why does that person do that? Basically, what we're doing is looking at how people behave. And so it's those observable behaviors. It's the objective behaviors, not the subjective, right? Subjective behaviors are like when we say, well, I think that person's honest. We think they're honest. Where are we basing that on? Or I like that person, or she interests me. Those are subjective. And we can make terrible mistakes when we make subjective judgments about people. This is talking about what we observe. Is the person quiet or loud? Are they fast-paced? Are they slower paced? Etc., etc. So let's hit this model now. And as we do it, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to think of somebody. Right now, I want you to think of somebody you know. It could be a coworker. It could be a family member. It could be a friend, whoever. Just think of that person. Put them in your mind's eye. Think of them, who they are. See them in your mind's eye. Think of a conversation you've had with them. All right? Good. Everybody's got their person in their mind's eye? All right. So this is the first dimension of this model. It's called the assertiveness dimension. But what I want you to do, I want you to think about this in terms of their speaking. When they talk, do they talk more or do they talk less? Do they tend to talk slow or do they tend to talk fast? Do they say things in a telling way or do they say things in an asking way, right? You know what I mean when they say things in a telling way? Do they, if you're going to go to lunch, they say, let's go for lunch. That's a telling way. Or say, I'm going for lunch now. Do you want to come along? That's an asking way. So there's a subtle difference there. So the person you're thinking of, what do they tend to do? And here's some things to help you out. In their verbal, do they talk faster or do they talk slower? Do they say lots? Do they say less? Do they tend to be louder or do they tend to be quieter? In terms of their hands, do they use their hands more or less? Do they tend to lean forward or lean back? And their eye contact, do they tend to look at you in the eye or do they tend to look away, right? There's a number of ways of doing this. So in terms of verbal, it's how they talk, their fastness, their loudness, how much they talk. In the body language, it's if they're more directive, if they lean forward, right? Or are they less so? So that's the first dimension. So you've got that person in your mind. You know where they may tend to be? Do they tend to be on the tell side or the ask side? Okay. And by the way, you'll notice that there's a grade here, right? Because they can be anywhere along here. And there are times people are fast and there's times that people are slow. What are they the most, though? Where are they most of the time? Okay, here's the other dimension. And I want you to think of this in terms of emotions. Do they tend to show their emotion more or do they tend to show their emotions less? Right? How do they show their emotions? So here's some ways to help you out with that. Their voice, like, do they have less inflection in the voice or more inflection? Do they show more emotion in their voice or less? When they're talking, is it about tasks and facts or is it about people, opinions, and stories? So thinking about that person, when they're talking to you, what do they tend to talk? Do they position it into tasks and facts and data, or is it in about people? Okay. How about nonverbal behaviors? The use of their hands again. Do they tend to use it more or less? Their body posture, is it rigid or is it casual? And their facial expression, is it controlled or animated? Okay, have you got that? All right, so let's now take those 2 dimensions, let's put them together. Now, I want to say something at this point about this model. Another reason why I love this model says that, and personally I believe this, you don't want to put people in boxes. It's dangerous to put people in boxes. It's dangerous to say, well, this person is this way, and then that's how they always act, because it isn't. We're human beings. We will act different in different situations, right? Depending on what the situation is, we may respond differently. But what this model says that that's okay, but there is a place where we have a tendency to go. Think of this in terms of think of it in terms of a neighborhood. You go home at the everyday. It's the place you go home where you sit down and you go, oh, I feel home. I feel comfortable. This is where I belong. It doesn't mean that you don't have to leave your neighborhood every once in a while and go from one place to another, but there is that one place. And that's what one of the things this model shows. So if we have somebody, if that person you were thinking about in your mind's eye, if they are on the tell side more and the control their emotions more, then we can say that they have a driving style. That's the neighborhood they live in. If they're more tell assertive, but they show their emotions more, then the neighborhood they're in is expressive. They have an expressive style. Now, if they show their emotions, but rather than tell, they're more ask assertive, then they have an amiable style. And finally, if they control their emotions and they're ask assertive, then we say they have an analytical style. So those are the 4 neighborhoods that people fall in. So think about that. That's where that person that you were thinking about was. Okay. Now, each one of these can be described in different ways. So people that live in a driving neighborhood, they can be described as independent, formal, practical, or dominating. People in the expressive neighborhood can be described as forceful, animated, adventurous, and impulsive. People in the amiable neighborhood can be seen as supportive, dependable, open, and pliable. And the analyticals can be seen as serious, exacting, logical, and decisive. Now, where was that person you thought of? Okay, where was that person you thought of? And would that be good ways of describing them? I mean, you'll notice that there are by the way, there's no good or bad neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are what they are. And you'll notice that there are negatives and positives of each of these styles. So for example, analyticals, they're serious, exacting, logical, but they're also indecisive. Now that's interesting. How can if an analytical, why would they be indecisive? Well, a good way to think about that is if you have somebody who lives way out in the far left, top left-hand corner of this neighborhood, that's where they are. These are the folks that suffer from that disease called the paralysis of analysis, where they just can't make a decision because they don't think they've got enough information. So that's where the indecisive come in, right? The amiables, they can be seen as supportive and dependable and open, but they can also be seen as pliable. Why is that? Because people over here in this far corner, in various degrees, they want to go along with everybody. And we'll get into that in a second. They want to go along with everybody, which can be a problem. If they can't make a decision because they're talking to 3 people and they want to agree with all 3 of them because they don't want to upset the apple cart, that becomes very difficult. So those are there you go with the 4 styles and how they stand up. Now, when I was learning this model a long time ago, over 25 years ago actually, because this model's been around since the 1960s, which I love because it's got so much research that keeps validating the information. And when I was learning it, I'll be honest, I had some challenges learning this model. It was part of the organization that I worked with. It was part of their culture. They taught this to everybody in the organization. And it was, everybody knew where everybody sat, and it really did help the communications in the organization. But when I was learning it, I took a workshop from a guy by the name of Joe Sheeran at York University. And what he did was he used birds. He used the imagery of birds to identify each one of these 4 styles, which I really loved, and it really resonated and helped me, and I hope it will help you. So for example, for those in the driving style, it was eagles. So when you think of an eagle in our cultural context, what image comes to mind? You're probably saying powerful, predator, independent, eagle-eyed, right? It's that idea of forcefulness. It's the idea of independence, results. For analyticals, he used owls. Why? Because for owls, in our cultural context, we have, think of knowledge, information, data, the wise owl, because they know stuff, right? It's all about knowing stuff, knowing information. For amiables, he used doves, because in our cultural context, again, doves are peace. It's about peacemakers. So for doves, it's about, again, relationships, keeping people together. And finally, for expressives, ta-da! We use peacocks. And if you haven't figured already, I'm a peacock. That's my space. That's the full disclosure. That's where I live. But again, peacocks represent, here I am, the symbol of here I am, I'm showing up, I'm the center of the attention. This is where you want to be. And so that's what he used for that. So here's a question for you. If you haven't figured it out already, where do you fit? If you self-identified yourself as A, you self-identified yourself as an eagle. If you self-identified yourself as a B, you self-identified as a peacock. Welcome to the club. If you identified yourself with C, it was a dove. And then finally, if you had more check marks for a D, you were an owl. You were an analytical. That's where you were. Now, again, if you're wondering if you had more than one, that's fine. I've got a question down the road that will nail it for you. And that's fair, because we can, if you wanted to, you could actually take each one of these quadrants, for example, and you can make them you could take each one of these quadrants and you can actually split them in 4. So you can have somebody who is a driver analytical, or you can be a driver expressive. And so if you had 4 in one column and a 3 in another, that secondary one is probably where you were. Or if you were matched up somewhere where you had a tie, the question I'm going to ask you down later on will help you figure that out. Okay, good. All right, so let's go. So now each one of these styles. Oh, I need to clear that, don't I? Clear all drawings. There we go. So don't panic if you're not wondering, if you kind of, and if you looked at what bird you were or which style you were, don't panic if you're not sure about it, right? I mean, it is who you are. The reality is we don't, by the time we're 12 or 13, we're basically set in who we are as an individual. You cannot change that. You are who you are. You won't change unless something really significant happens, like you have a frontal lobotomy or a really serious psychological event happens. It won't change. But you do learn to shift. You can learn to shift your behavior. You can learn to move from one neighborhood to the other, right? So if you are if you are in the driving style, you can learn to move around the neighborhoods. by shifting your behavior. And that's what this talks about, because each one of the styles has a need, has an orientation, has a growth action. So the need is, what drives you, and the style is what you can observe in that person. And then each one of them has a growth action to help you as an individual be more versatile, which is what we call being able to move from one neighborhood to the other. So let's look at this for a second. The driving neighborhood, if you are in that neighborhood, that person's need is results. They need results. That's what they're fighting for. That's where they're moving towards. So that's where their orientation is action. They're always having to be doing something. So their growth action, if you're in the driving style, your growth action is to slow down, because you're on the fast side, to slow down and to listen. Right? And I'm not talking about listening to other people. It's often listening to that little voice in the back of your head as well that's telling you what to do. But you need to slow down and listen. And a very easy way to do that is really just to ask questions. Get in the mindset of asking open-ended questions. That will automatically slow things down. So because a driver, right, wants to go off full tilt and let's just go do it, or I'm just going to do it. You've probably heard, if you heard somebody say, let's just go do it, that's probably a driver, because they have to be doing it because it's the results they want. They want to be right out there. By slowing down, they will bring other people along with them. So they need to slow down and to listen. Expressives, their need is personal approval. They want to be liked. It's the Peacock, it's all about the spotlight. They want to be liked. Their orientation is spontaneity. They will take off. Now, whereas a driver will take off to get things done, the expressive will take off just to take off, just to start it, right? So their growth action is to slow down, because again, they're on the fast side, and to check their emotional stance. They have to check their emotional stance. So somebody that's way out here, for example, I call those flaming expressives. They're the ones that just tend to be loud. They just kind of seem to be all over the place. So for example, I'm an expressive, so I'll pick on myself here for a second. My wife, I'm the guy where goes to IKEA and comes home and doesn't bother with the instructions, just starts putting it together. And a funny story, I was doing this is just as an aside, this is a part of a bit longer 3-hour workshop that I do on this subject. I do a full 3-hour or 1-day workshop around this, which is much more intensive and has video and more activities. But I was doing one of those yesterday, and I said that same thing. I said, I go to IKEA, and from across the room, I heard this almost like this scream, like, "Oh no!" And believe it or not, it was from somebody who was an analytical. It was somebody who's an analytical who needs to make sure everything is set up and right. It was a perfect illustration of what I was saying. So I'm the kind of guy, right, who goes down. My wife, before I leave the house, she'll say, "John, have you got your wallet? Have you got your mobile? Have you got what?" Because half the time I'm down the road and I'm turning around and coming back because I forgot something. Because it's just this, I don't check. So that's expressive. So that's us. For those that are amiables, their need is personal security. They just want to know that they're part of a team, that they have that personal security. They're liked, but liked for the team and being part of something. So their orientation is relationships. It's all about relationships. So just a note here, if you notice, between expressives and amiables, expressives, it's personal approval. It's they need to be liked personally. For amiables, it's being part of a team, being liked as part of a team. There's a subtle difference between those. And so for an amiable, their growth action is to initiate. What I mean by that, they're on the slow side, right? So they have to pick up speed a little bit in their decision making. And they have to learn that it's okay to make decisions even though it could hurt other people's feelings. So these people that struggle making decisions and going along with and having to step out and say, let's do this, or make a decision because They don't want to hurt people's feelings, right? A classic example of that is my wife, who is an amiable. And one day she was co-chairing a very large international music festival in Vancouver. And we were driving from our home in Kelowna to Vancouver for a planning meeting. She was co-chairing this committee. I think there were 10 or 12 members on the planning committee. And as we're driving down the highway, she turns to me and she says, you know what? I think I'm turning into a driver. And I said, you're turning into a driver? And she said, yeah, you know, I'm having to tell these people what to do. Then some of them aren't keeping to the timelines, and I'm having to stay on their backs. And in some cases, I'm finding I'm having to do the stuff myself. And I said, well, how does that make you feel? And she says, terrible. And I said, why? She said, I just want everyone to get along. So, no, she's definitely an amiable. It's the team thing. Is that she was feeling very uncomfortable because of being forced to having to work in this neighborhood. The last one, analyticals. Their need is to be right. Their need is to be right. They have to be right. So their orientation is thinking, right? So they always have to be looking at the data, making sure the data is right. Their growth action is to pick up speed and to make a decision. Make a decision even though you may not have the information or the data. I said earlier that people that live over here have the paralysis of analysis. It's because they don't think they've got enough data. They don't think. More often than not, they do. They don't think they do. So they have to make a decision based on what limited information they have. So analyticals, you can see then when I was talking about being at the IKEA, and I'll just go ahead and do it, the analytical, she's the person that actually unpacks the IKEA box and lines up all the bolts and all the screws and all the pieces and counts it against the instructions before they start to make sure that everything is there. And they don't start until they have it. So each one of these styles, right, there's degrees in them. So a person could be in this space here. They could be a driver with a little bit of amiable to them. Or they could be a driver those are the folks, you know, they go, well, what an idiot. That guy's excuse the language, asshole, right? Because he's just driving over everybody. He really isn't. It's just that's what the perception of that person is because they're so results oriented. So how do we work with these folks? So just think about this for a second. Where was that person you were thinking of? And where are you on this model? And how does that inform how you communicate with them? How does that inform how you work with them? Think about that for a second. If you are somebody who is an analytical and you like to have information, you want to have all the information and facts right, and yet you're working with a driver who will just kind of go off and do things, how do you manage that? Well, here's a couple of tips, right? If you are an analytical, you've got all the information, and you're working with a driver. The driver, recognize that the driver doesn't need all that information. It doesn't mean that you don't have the information to deliver to them or to give them or information to give them, but it's not necessarily what they want. So don't start loading them up with information. In fact, I always joke, if you've got a 30-minute meeting scheduled with a driver, plan for 15 minutes. Because after 15 minutes, they're gone. You've lost them. All right? But the good thing about it, somebody who's a driver, you can challenge them. They love to be challenged, right? Because it's all about action. It's all about doing stuff. So if you're in a conversation if you're on the phone with somebody and you're having a conversation with somebody over the phone, and they say to you, "Oh, I'm not sure. This isn't exactly what I'm looking for." You can challenge them with that. You can say, "I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you say this a little bit more?" And they love that. They actually love that. Now, you can do that with a driver, right? You can challenge a driver, but if you've got an amiable that you're talking to, and you do that, that could destroy an amiable. Oh, they don't want anything to do with that. They just want people together. They just want the friendship. So try and pick up the cues when you're talking to people. Pick up the cues when you're talking to them on the phone. This is why I love this model. It's very, very simple. All you have to do is on a piece of paper, right? On a piece of paper, just write across. Just write across. And just write, if you're talking to somebody, just write T and write A, right? And control and emote. Just write that. And as you're talking to them, think about what's happening here. Are they talking fast? Are they talking slow? Are they talking loud? Are they talking soft? Are they saying things in a telling way to you or an asking way? And what are you getting a sense from the intonation in their voice? Are they showing emotion or not? Do they sound like they're getting frustrated, or they're pretty cool, level-headed? And just using those cues, you can put them in here. Then what do they need? What do each one of those 4 styles need? Okay, so if you talk to an analytical, they need to be right. So help them be right. Help them know that they're making the best decision. If you're talking about an expressive, oh, it's about them. Oh, this is the greatest thing you can do. I know you would really like this. Or I really appreciate what you're doing for the team. If you're talking to an amiable, it's more about the team, right? The experience. They'll love the experience, the engagement. I really appreciate what you're doing for the team. I really appreciate what you're doing for the group. There's that difference between them. Actually, if you look at this, and if you're above the line, it's about tasks, right? And it's all about tasks. This isn't easy to write this way. And if you're below the line, what is it about? It's about people, right? It's about people. So that's the difference here. So when if you're on the phone or you're talking to people, whatever it is, that's how you can communicate with them. So I said to you, if you were a little ambivalent about where you fit in this model, I had a question for you. So here's the question. What do you do under stress? When you're under tension, what do you do to reduce tension? So you're in a tense situation. I'm not talking about hair pulling out, end of your rope stress. You're just in a regular tenseful situation, slightly stressful situation. In other words, every day at work, right? Just slightly a little bit of tenseness. How do you reduce that? Well, there's 4 things people tend to do when reduce stress. Do you get autocratic? In other words, do you say, oh, I'm just going to go do it? And if that's the case, that's the response. That's the initial driver's response. Okay? Or do you attack? And by the way, what I mean by attack is you don't physically attack somebody, right? It's just something comes out of your mouth, some words. I had somebody in a group once said, oh, I get pissy. I think that's a perfect example, explanation of it. They just kind of, they just kind of jab the knife at somebody. The other thing people tend to do is they tend to acquiesce. They'll go, sure, no problem. Yeah, whatever you want to do, that's fine. They go along with the group. And finally, what they do is they avoid it. So think about that. What do you tend to do? And so if you've got a score that is equal for one of the 2 styles, this should nail it for you. If you were tied between analytical and driving style, for example, but you tend to get autocratic, you just get sent to do it, that's your primary style. That's where you are, but you probably then live in this space right here, which means that you are driving analytical. Okay, so you're getting that. That's Okay, and if you tend to attack, then that's where you are. That's where you are. That's where you live, in the expressive space. So this is a perfect way of looking at that. Now, what happens here, though, is we do go through different stresses throughout the day, and the day will get more stressful. And what will happen is we will move through these zones. So if you're a driving style, this is the neighborhood you live in, you'll get autocratic. But as tension rises, you'll move into this space and you'll avoid it at first. But then you'll kind of attack, you'll get a bit pissy, and finally you'll acquiesce. So a person who's in a driving style, when they're getting to the hair pulling out end of the rope, they just can't take it anymore, then they acquiesce. So there's a red flag for you. If you're in a role where you manage people, if you see somebody who you figure is a driving style and they start acquiescing, that's a really big red flag for you. Similarly, if you see an analytical start to attack, that's a really big red flag, because the analytical will go from here to here to here to here. Expressives will go from here to here to here. So you end up in the opposite zone. All right, so you have to be very, very, very careful of that. So for, if you've got somebody who's driving, you're dealing with people that have in these situations, here's some things you can do. So let's say you've got a client on the phone, a customer on the phone, a member on the phone, or you're a manager and you're dealing with somebody in the workplace. Show for the driving style, you can show them and you can help them achieve the results of goals they're committed to achieving. Show them how you can help them. But in expressive, it's about listening. With amiables, it's about helping them feel safe in the environment, right? Because they want to be part of the team. Now, here's something interesting about an analytical, because I know I live with one, I know this for sure. Amiables are funny. They will actually acquiesce, right? So amiables are under pressure, they acquiesce. So it's like you say, what movie would you like to go see? And they'll go, well, I'm good, whatever one it is. And you'll say, well, do you want to see movie A or B? And they'll go, well, which one do you want to see? Right? They'll go along with whatever you want, and they'll go, okay, that's fine, they'll say. But every time they do that, they collect a stamp. So every time they do that, they collect a stamp. And then one day, they'll cash all those stamps in, and you'll wonder what the hell happened. It'll just blow up in your face. So be careful of amiables, because that's what they do. So let's just go over the 4 styles very briefly again. Well, before we do that, here's some 6 best practices for observing other styles. So here's some homework for you, actually, over the next day. If you haven't been doing this already throughout the last 50 minutes that we've been talking, if you haven't been doing this already, try not to define a style too quickly. Watch people. So over the next couple of days, pick somebody in the office, pick somebody you work with, somebody you know, and just observe them. Just see where they are. Where do they fit? Okay? Don't let your feelings interfere. Just concentrate on how the other person is acting. Try not to be subjective. Try to be very objective. Right? There's no good, there's no bad, there's no why. People are who they are. Okay. Finally, you can watch how they deal with tension. How do they deal with stress? Okay, because that is really a good indicator, right? Do they get autocratic? Do they attack? Do they avoid, or do they acquiesce? That will tell you where they are. So over the next couple of days, just observe somebody and see where they are. So just some key points here, just to refresh what we talked about. Social style is not the same thing as personality. It is really surface behavior. It's what you observe about people. The other thing, it's not an absolute, right? It's a matter of degrees. People, yes, there's a place we live, there's a place that's home, but that doesn't mean that we don't work in other neighborhoods. In fact, you know, if it was a perfect world, let me, you know, if it was a perfect world, there's our quadrant, right? If it's a perfect world, everybody would be working towards the center. Everybody would be moving towards the center, right? But is it a perfect world? No, it's not a perfect world. So what do? Well, now, unfortunately, folks, there's this quote that says, with knowledge comes great responsibility. Too bad, so sad, you now have the knowledge. You know where you are. And you can use that to determine where other people live and what do they need. What do they need, right? So if you're working with somebody who's an analytical, what do they need? They need information, right? They need to know the information. So one of the things you can do is help them save face, help them be right. They need to save face. If you're dealing with a driver, what they need, well, one of the things that they need, the things you can do with them is save them time. So if you can help them by save them time, that's one of the best things you can do. For expressives, right? What's one of the things you can do for them is you can save them effort. Help, you know, just they're big picture people that you can laugh with them, you can listen to their opinions, think big picture. That's what you can do for them. And for these folks, it's, again, relationships. You can save them relationships. So, you know, in a perfect world, we're all moving together. That's not what happens. So what I'd like to introduce to you, I haven't got a slide for this, but I'd like to introduce to you what I call the platinum rule. Now, we all know what the golden rule is. The golden rule says that we treat people how we want to be treated, right? You treat people how you want to be treated. That's the golden rule. Well, I want to introduce you to the platinum rule, which actually says that you treat people how they want to be treated. You treat people how they want to be needed. So you find out what their needs are and you give them what their needs. So rather than me being, you know, a big picture person and I just want to get on with it and let me just go do it, if I'm working with somebody, for example, who's an analytical, I will slow myself down and I will take the time to make sure that they have what they have. Do they have the details? Do they have enough details? If I'm working with an analytical and I say to them, hey, can you go and check that out? I'll give them the space to do that. But here's a warning for people working with analyticals, with the owls, don't just send them off to look stuff up because they'll never come back. They'll just keep looking for the information. So you can put some boundaries around it. You can say, can you go check that out for me? But if you can come back by next Tuesday, or you're talking to somebody on the phone and they say, well, I need to check something out. And if you've got a sense that they may be analyticals, you can say, okay, when would be a good time to call you back? Find some boundaries, set a timeline. So you've got that for them. All right. So treat other people how they want to be treated is really, really, really important. So basically the next, let's clear the drawings. So the next step really is all about what's next steps for you. Well, share your style with other colleagues and ask them for insight. So I know some of you are on this call or in the same office. Talk about your styles. Think about that informs how you interact with one another. Does that explain some of the conflicts that you might have been having in, you know, wondering, well, why is that person being that way? Well, you know what? It's because that's their style. That's who they are. They're not going to change. When was the last time you tried to change somebody and how did that work out for you? It doesn't work, right? So what you can do is help provide them what they need. So if you're thinking you're going to have an interaction with somebody, think about, okay, where's their style? What might their style be, and what will that behavior? What's the behavior that I might be getting from that person? Look for the two behavioral dimensions with people. Take steps to meet your colleagues' social style needs as you interact with them. So take those steps. So we've got about 6 minutes left to the top of the hour. That's my information. As I say, this is actually part of a bigger session that I do. So if anybody on the call, I promise that this wouldn't be a sales pitch, and it's not going to be a sales pitch, but if you are interested in knowing more about the full-length version of this workshop, by all means, feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions on that. So I'm going to ask if anybody's got questions. If you've got some questions, you can unmute your microphone and ask a question. Or any feedback, ideas, comments. Now, when I do this in person, I often say interpretive dance, but since we're on video, that doesn't work too well. Any questions? Well, listen, I have been recording this session. So if anybody is, so I have been recording this session. So if anybody would like, is interested, they can reach out to me. I will be emailing everybody with a one-pager that I have on some tips on how to work with people with the different styles. So everybody will get that, and I will link the recording to that email as well. So feel free to, they'll probably get that in the next day or two. Was there a question?
The least you can do.
Hey, John.
Hey.
I have a question. So with your questions at the beginning of the presentation, with the B, C, A, and Ds.
Yeah.
I had three-way ties.
Okay, fair enough. So Keegan, what about the stress question? What happens when you're under stress? What do you tend to do when you're under stress? Do you kind of take over things? Do you tend to?
It's either avoid or take charge of self.
Yeah, so think about that for a second. What's the difference between avoid and take charge for you?
High stress is take charge, and like a low stress would be avoid it.
Okay, all right. So what were the three? What in the ABCDs? What were you tied in?
B, which is the peacock, A, which is the eagle, and D, which is the owl.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But and so you say you avoid. So I would say, because of where the stress avoidance is, it's probably you're probably an owl. You're probably analytical. But again, if you take the square, right? If we take that square and the quadrants, and you take the owl quadrant, you split that in 4. It means you're probably in the top right-hand corner of that mini quadrant, which is the analytical driver.
Interesting.
But the other thing is, we talk how people move around is called versatility. And I didn't really talk much about versatility in this webinar. I talk more about it in detail in the full workshop. But your versatility is your ability to move around. And you may be an individual that has already built in a certain amount of versatility. You've learned how to adapt. And so that's what's showing up for you.
I find personal connections, friendships is probably the most important thing. So I actually identified myself as amiable initially, but all this is kind of confusing myself.
Well, ask people in the office to observe you and see where they think you might be. That's where they think you might be, because again, self-observation we're not the best at anyway. It's what other people observe in the space. Like, what do they see? How do they see you reacting to stress? Ask them what they think, where you might be. But I would, it's. You could be really, if you did if we did the quadrant, you could be very close to that center space. Who knows? But I think you're still in that top right-hand corner.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information to grasp, and I think I just want to thank you for the time today.
Hey, no problem. Thank you. Christine, you got your hand raised. You got a question?
It's actually more a comment, just for Kieran, because the first time that I did this, I was similar. I was split between 3 different ones, but I am a flaming expressive, which I've come to realize later on. So I'd say if you monitor your own behavior over the next few months and really start to think about it, you'll probably, if you take the test again, you might have a clearer picture of what you actually are, because that's what happened with me.
Yeah, perfect. And again, in the recording that I'll make available to everybody, those slides will be there with the questions. So if you want to review them, you can. Yeah, thanks, Christine. That's a great observation. Appreciate it. Anybody else? We're at the top of the hour, but I'll give an opportunity for anybody else. If anybody else wants to make a comment or. No? Well, listen, folks, thanks very much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. It's been great. I always have fun presenting these myself. Everyone tends to be a little bit different, but the message is always the same, and that is, be mindful, a little bit what Christine just said, be mindful of where you are. Like, how does your style now inform how you communicate and interact with other people around you? Whether it's people in the office, your colleagues, your peers, even your family members, or the people you're talking to on the phones every day. So thank you very much for joining. I appreciate it. And again, reach out if you've got any. You can always reach out to me if you've got any other questions, and I'll be happy to answer those. Okay. So take care. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Bye.